the Trump, look, we know that the Trump campaign is run by a very smart guy, Chris LaCivita, who, among other things, turned John Kerry's Vietnam service, wartime service, against him, the whole swift boating incident. So my question is, obviously, the Trump people they're scrambling. Yeah. They weren't planning on running against her, and that's clear. But when they figure out what to do, how effective are they going to be, and what weaknesses or alleged weaknesses are they going to be targeting?
Go ahead. The biggest thing they're going to do is call her the border czar, right? They're going to say that she was in charge of the border and that's why it's so bad. She wasn't the border czar. I was on the press call when they explained it. You know, she was dealing with Northern Triangle irregular immigration and the issues and why people were leaving the countries. It doesn't really matter, right, in this time.
Because border czar makes it sound like you're in charge of law enforcement at the actual line. Yeah.
They're going to come at her with Bidenflation, right? Bidenomics, that was a bad thing. You know, they've already been hitting her on kind of that she is mealy mouth, which is not true anymore, right? That she's someone who kind of had a struggle at the times talking about different types of things. That's gone. I will also say something that's really important is that we've already seen a lot of racism and sexism, and that's going to be a huge part of this campaign. And Republican leadership are talking to them behind the scenes and saying, please cut it out. There are things that we can actually talk about here, but calling her a DEI hire and being sexist about it, I won't say the things that they've been saying.
Wait, I want to get clear on this. Who is saying not to do it and who
Speaker Mike Johnson has talked to House Republicans and told them to cut it out because it's
they
not
always
helpful.
listen.
They're very, yes, he has lots of control over that.
We famously don't listen to him, obviously.
Part of what they're going to be able to do, they're not going to say DEI candidate, at least some of them won't. They're going to say socialist, right? And that's also has a obvious connotation. Right? And they couldn't really say it very effectively about Joe Biden because he's well known to the country. He's been here for 50 years. He's kind of, you know, Scranton Joe. Nobody thinks he's a socialist. She is a person of color, a woman of color from California, from San Francisco. And even though in San Francisco she was thought of as being too right-wing, to the rest of the country, that's an easy sale to make.
Adam, I mean, let's talk about it frankly. How big an issue will racism and misogyny be? You know, she's a twofer. Obviously, she's a woman of color. We've never seen this in a presidential campaign. Does she lose support because of who she is? Or are the people who are not apt to vote for a woman of color the people who would never vote for a Democrat anyway?
Yeah, you know, it seems like there's a base of people who it might be built in where if you're not going to vote, if you weren't going to vote for a woman of color, you weren't going to vote for a woman, period, then that's sort of who you were, right? But I think what Kamala is looking at now, or the vice president is looking at now, is sort of how she's going to be able to expand that base, right? Part of that comes through the VP pick. You know, looking at, you know, maybe she won't pull in as many white working class voters in places like Pennsylvania or Michigan, right? That's something that could be solved by the vice presidential pick. But she's also pulling back people who the party assumed that they lost, right? The Detroit News poll today, right, has her at about 88% with black voters. You know, there were couple of irregularities in that poll, but
So one of the big glimpses of that is this week there were a number of sort of what I would call affinity group Zooms, and the largest one that they say crashed them was white women for Harris. And there is this
There's a white dudes for Harris.
Right? Yes. But I think to me that isn't, and these are like popping up. There were ones within the South Asian community, the broader Asian community, black women, black men. And to me, you know, there are certainly voters for whom her identity will be a liability. I would also argue there is a chunk of the electorate for whom it is viewed as an asset.
Well, let's talk about the vice presidential sweepstakes for a moment. It seems there's different. You hire different vice presidents to serve different needs. Eugene, you've studied this. It seems on the face of it that Josh Shapiro, popular governor of, let's say, the most key state, the absolute keystone state, seems like a pretty obvious thing to do, especially because he has more of a centrist reputation. He pulls the ticket a little bit toward the middle. But talk about how they might be thinking about who we hire for this role.
It's kind of an old saying in politics. There's three types of vice presidential picks. One is the one for June, November, and January. June is to get the party excited during the convention. November is to win. January is the governing partner. people around Harris are saying that she's looking for a governing partner, right? So she's looking for someone that kind of thinks the way that she thinks, sees the world and the way that she views it, and is kind of thinking about, like, you know, their middle class, you know, from the bottom up, middle out kind of thing that they have been talking about. She is also going to have to, at some point, decide which of these men, because that's who that they're largely looking at, white men. She's going to pick who could help her in one of these states. You could probably make an argument for any of these men. Josh Shapiro, obviously, Mark Kelly in Arizona, right? That's a pick where then you pick up a different type of state. You know, Roy Cooper in North Carolina. How does he help there?
And maybe Georgia.
Maybe Georgia, right? And so there's all these different types of calculations that they're trying to make, and they're vetting them at the fastest vetting that probably has ever happened. And so the
fastest vetting since J.D. Vance.
That's
which we'll get to.
Sure.
Keep promising that we're going to get there.
Yeah, we're going to get there at some point.
Yeah, but so in other words, you think that they're arguing that they're looking for a governing partner, but let's not kid ourselves.
Peter
and I are like,
But she's done this. She's been
I know.
vice president.
I know, but Peter, what were you going to? What was the cynical?
I don't want somebody who could be president. I want somebody who can win the state. No, they don't say that.
But they have to win Pennsylvania.
They have to win Pennsylvania, but
or a combination of.
I mean,
Wisconsin,
that's the
Michigan.
question is whether or not, right? If she loses votes for whatever reason we just talked about in some of these states, does she pick them up in other states that they have basically given up? They've basically given up Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia. Does she scramble that map?
Now, Mark Kelly seems like, I mean, the resume is perfect. There's one problem with the Senate seat, but I mean, Mark Kelly seems like sort of an obvious choice. I mean, I'm not asking you to speculate, but I am. But I am.
No, yeah, it is right. If you think about his resume, right, you're running against an astronaut. John Glenn, right?
Prosecutor
astronauts. No one wants to run against an astronaut.
But as you said, right, you lose him in the Senate. You lose a very popular person in Arizona. So
and you might not get Arizona.
Exactly.
Right.
And it
Even
was not a
if you
guarantee.
But I mean, broadly, if you look at all the names that are on the series short list, we're talking about white men. And to me, this is interesting because what she seems to be trying to do and what Democrats want to do is to really broaden out the demographics. And it is a striking difference, going back to J.D. Vance, from what we saw with Trump, which he doubled down on his own base.
Oh, and thank you for raising the subject of J.D. Vance, because there's a guy who didn't have a great week, and in part because of things like this. I want you to watch this for a second.
When you go to the polls in this country as a parent, you should have more power. You should have more of an ability to speak your voice in our democratic republic than people who don't have kids. Let's face the consequences and the reality. If you don't have as much of an investment in the future of this country, maybe you shouldn't get nearly the same voice. Now, people will say, and I'm sure the Atlantic and the Washington Post and all the usual suspects will criticize me about this in the coming days. Well, doesn't this mean that non-parents don't have as much of a voice as parents? Doesn't this mean that parents get a bigger say in how our democracy functions? Yes, absolutely.
Just want to know for the record, the Atlantic didn't say anything about that, to the best of my knowledge. But in a couple of minutes we have left, what is going on with J.D. Vance? I mean, this seems like a troubled pick.
Well, he certainly challenges normal Americans who may or may not have kids, but certainly don't believe.
But this isn't the only one.
No, of course not. He says it again and again, forgetting, of course.
And doubled down today on Megyn Kelly.
And then, by the way, George Washington didn't have kids. He had stepkids, right? We had the whole.
Like the father of the country, literally.
So this is never something the founders thought was a good idea. Of course, everybody has an investment in this country, whether you have kids or not.
So my question is Donald Trump? There's some speculation that Trump may be regretting this pick. Does it? I mean, do we have any sense of that, or is that just idle speculation at this point?
That he's uncomfortable with the coverage, I would say, of his vice presidential pick. This is a man who cares deeply about what the media says about him, even though he fights with us a lot, and how people look at him and the folks around his campaign. He had beef with Steve Bannon because Steve Bannon was too far ahead and was kind of the mastermind, everyone was saying. And so now you're looking at J.D. Vance have not just a rough week where people are finding this oppo. Democrats are all of a sudden very good at finding oppo research on candidates, but he's having awkward interactions at rallies. He's having kind of weird videos of what's happening right now. That is making him and his folks uncomfortable.
To be fair, well, let me ask you this in just 30 seconds. Does he bring any advantages that you could see right now? Because that could be very much the case.
I think he doubles down on the already existing demographic that Trump had. So I don't think he really broadens out the party. If anything, his comments about women in particular saying that they were childless cat ladies, I think really hurts some Republican women as well. College-educated Republican women have been moving away from the party, white college-educated voters. I don't think this helps them. There's a lot of people who don't have kids, a lot of people who want to have kids who also struggle to have kids.
All right, in the couple of seconds we have left, just based on your survey of the possible Democrats out there, who would you most like to see for sheer illumination reasons debate J.D. Vance? Could be a very interesting debate if they actually have a debate.
Yeah, I think, honestly, Governor Beshear would be interesting, and then also Josh Shapiro.
Josh Shapiro. It's going to be very interesting to watch this choice.